Hey YouTubers, this is Ishtaq with you once again, and this is one of my little kitties. This one is Bella, and I have another one. Hopefully, I'll be able to show her to you someday. She doesn't look very happy. In any case, welcome to another episode of my photography blog. And in this episode, we're going to look at how to create panoramas in Lightroom and in Photoshop. Do you want to stay? Okay. Oh, well, I think I can keep her. So yeah. Previously, if you wanted to create a panorama, you would have had to use a specialized software for that, or you would have had to take your pictures to Photoshop. The newest versions of Lightroom actually have this capability built in, so you can create your basic panoramas and your basic HDRs as well, which we'll cover in a different episode. And there you can stitch the photos and still have a raw photo with all the information and play with it. But the thing is, there are certain limitations, and it's important to be able to create a panorama because a lot of times we are right in front of a magnificent subject, but it's just too big for our lenses, and no matter how wide we go, we can't really cover it completely. So what we're going to do is look at a set of pictures that I took just a couple of days earlier when I was just walking through downtown Philadelphia, and we'll see how we can stitch those photos and create a panorama, and then fix whatever perspective corrections that need to be there. So let's head on to the processing table and see how we can fix this. And I'll let little Bella go now from this little unpleasant episode that she just had. All right, have a nice.
So let's look at a few photos here in Lightroom to see how we can create a panorama out of these. So the photos I have for you are, this is the first one, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth. So you see here that I tried to capture a number of photos around the building. I was standing right in front of it in just, in the pavement here, and I was trying to capture as much of it as possible given where I am, and even at 24 millimeters I wasn't wide enough to capture the entire photo. So that's where I was. That's how it all started, and that was the whole point. If you're in front of something and you can't really go far, I could of course go across the street and take a photo, but if you have to, what do you do and how do you create your panorama? So that's the target here. And those of you who are from Philadelphia will know which building it is. But for those who don't know, this is a famous building. It's the Union League Club building. It's right in front of the Philadelphia City Hall. So if you keep walking along here, just one block later, you'll see the huge Philadelphia City Hall building. So onto the processing. Let's do some very basic things because processing is not the focus of this episode. We covered that previously. We don't need to do anything much for exposure, but let's just bring down the highlights and open some shadows in case we need some information from there. Pressing down Alt, moving the black and white sliders just a little bit, adding a pinch of clarity and vibrance to go. There are definitely other things we can do. If you want, maybe you can add some tone curve adjustments here. HSL, not going to play with this for now. For lens corrections, I advise you to as well. Always have the profile corrections enabled and the chromatic aberrations enabled. And well, in the details, I have some sharpening applied here by default anytime I'm importing something. Let's push that just a little bit. So there we have that. We can of course press Alt and move this slider so that a mask is applied, and we are only sharpening the edges so the photo doesn't look, so that we're not sharpening any high frequency elements around here. So that's just a basic to get started with. It's just a basic workflow. Alright, so I wasn't actually in the first photo, but in any case, what you do now is press Command A, and come to sync and sync. So all the photos that I had here are going to be synchronized so that they have the same settings as the first photo that I had. So and anytime you go through these photos, you'll see that they have the exact same setting. And now comes the part where we create a panorama, and that previously used to be a more tedious process, because what you had to do was select everything, right click, edit in, and then do merge to panorama in Photoshop. But in the latest version of Lightroom, this is very much easier. All you have to do is come to photo merge, panorama, and that's it. So this creates a panorama inside, and of course let's have this selected first, so that you know Lightroom is going to create a panorama inside Lightroom. And the beauty of this, or the great benefit of this, is that this will also be a raw file. So any kind of processing that you could do in a raw file, you'll be able to do in this file as well. And any adjustments that you made, any sliders, anything that you did here will be reflected in the new file. And it'll also carry over any kind of color label that you may have had, any kind of star rating that you may have had. So it's very useful. It's almost a natural extension of what you have been working on, just that you'll end up with a much bigger file. So here you see the final photo. The good thing is it has actually covered the entire building, something that would have been very difficult for me to capture unless I used, say, a fisheye lens, which I don't own. So that's one option, one projection. And when it comes to projections, there are many different kinds of projections, but in this version of Lightroom you have 3. And in most cases that you can get along with 3, or you can get started with 3 and fix the rest later on. And we'll look into that very quickly. But for now, let's just look at how each projection changes. So here's the spherical projection. Let's see how cylindrical works. And of course I had the auto crop checked. Let me uncheck that one so you can see a little bit better. Give it a second and it'll come up. And alright, so this is the cylindrical projection. And finally we're going to click on, so there you see from the cylindrical, and you can tell from these curvy lines how it's stitching the photos. And of course if we go to spherical, we'll see that too. Well, let's try perspective projection as well, because what we're trying to do here is we're trying to make sure that the building is not so rounded like it is here. We don't want the straight lines to be curvy. It just doesn't look good, especially when you're working with architecture. It's one of those cardinal flaws. Your lines need to be straight. And in this particular case, given where I was standing right in front, the perspective projection works somewhat better than others. So instead of those other two, let's just pick this one and click merge, and you'll see here that a panorama is being created. And once that's done, we will see, as I just told you, all these changes that we made and then synchronized within the files. They will be shown in the final file as well. And then what we're going to look at is, if we are not happy with what we have, are we limited in any way? And the answer obviously is no, because there are things you can do. Of course, one route is you can get hold of third-party plugins, and there are software and plugins. One that comes to mind is AutoPano, and there are others as well that people have been using for a long time. You can always export your photos to those programs, so you can just export these as TIFF files and then import those in the other plugin software and work from there. Or you can just try this, and there are some solutions in Photoshop as well, which we will look at. Let's give it a few seconds to complete. If it takes long, I'll just pause the video and start from the point where we have it. Okay, so here we have the final panorama created by Lightroom, and here it's covered everything. And of course it's a good idea to go through the various parts of the photo, especially where there were multiple photos overlapped and stitched. And the reason is that it's done in software. There are lots of ways to guide it and different lines here and there, but the stitching is not always perfect. So if you are working on a panorama, it's a good idea to always look into the various areas to zoom in and see if everything has been done right. And of course you'll see that this is a huge file, 7600 by 9000 pixels. It's a huge file, and this is actually one of the reasons to take panoramas, because if you want a high resolution photo, and in case of architecture, if you want to zoom in and make sure that there are not any kind of perspective distortions, you can keep on taking photos little by little, and there will be tens of photos, and you can come back and stitch them in software in post-processing. It'll take time. You'll have to have a lot of memory to do that, but you can do it. That's the whole idea, to show what can be done. Now to work on it further, what we do is we right click and we edit in Photoshop CC, and this will open in Photoshop. That once again will take a little time. Okay, so we now have the photo in Photoshop, and it should be in an unlocked layer. If it's not, double click on this. If it's if it's a background layer and it's locked, double click and hit OK, and it'll be an unlocked layer. Then select the layer, and you can come to filter, and this wonderful filter here called the adaptive wide angle, and this is a wonderful thing. Previously, when we created Panorama and brought it to Photoshop, this would be very useful, and you can still see how it can be used. So what this does is, say if you have an edge that is not straight but it should be, let's say an edge that should be vertical, what you do is you hold down Shift and you draw a line, and then you let go. You see, it knows that this edge should be straight, and it attempts to make it a straight line. Again, you draw the line, and it'll try to identify the edge and sort of hug the border here and try to make it straight. So again, you can keep on doing it. It takes a lot of work. It's definitely not an easy process, and of course when you do this, you have to go back and forth to make sure that you have not introduced anything wrong, because that's one of the most common things to happen. You may be looking at one edge, and that might cause you change elsewhere where it will just not be good. Let's see, for example, let's make a line here, and you see it's identifying the curve and trying to make it straight, as you see it just did over there. Now what if you want to make a straight line? Well, the idea is the same. You hold down Shift and draw a line, and you'll see this is a curved line because it identified that this photo is a little curvy. So there we go. That curve is pushed in to make it a straight line. Again, you can try and do that and on top as well. It'll push it down a little bit. So that's how, let me delete that last one. So that's how you can fix things here once you come. Of course, I was shooting from a corner, so it's not a full frontal projection. It wouldn't work well. So I'm not going to save this here. I just wanted to show you how to do it, because you could have had a different projection, then come here and worked on it this way. There's another thing that you can do, and of course these are things not necessarily that you have to do either one of these or the other. You can always mix and match, and that's often the best way to go. So what we do here is we're pressing Command T or Control T in Windows, or you can come to edit and click on free transform. But then what we do is we click on warp, and what this does is it allows us to kind of play with the photo by hand. You see, I can move each of these points, or I can even move inside here to make any kind of change that I want. I can warp the photo, literally speaking. So anything I want to do here I can do, and it's something that you work by hand as an artist. So that's something we can do here to make any kind of changes we want, and then click on the check mark or press enter to accept. Again, I'm not making this change permanent either, but you get the idea. You can come here and you can make any changes you want to finalize, and then when you close and you save, yeah, sure, let's save. The idea is that if you do this, once the saving is done, you will be able to see a copy of that in Lightroom. So that change, whatever is done here, will be reflected in Lightroom, and there we go, it created a different file with the changes. So that's how you work between Photoshop and Lightroom, or just in Lightroom if you have a photo where it's not too big of a deal to adjust after the panorama has been created. So I hope you found this useful. Of course, there's something very quickly. You see, this is the photo that returned, and in this case we have all the sliders set to 0. It's all in default position, but it actually isn't. What we had was something that was modified. So these are the settings that you see here, and that's reflected in the raw file inside the panorama raw file inside Lightroom. So that's a good thing, and that's the benefit over having something that returns from Photoshop with no information at all. I hope you found this very useful, because this is something I use a lot. I really use it a lot. Anytime I'm in front of something and I can't really go far, and in the city I have to do that a lot, because if I stepped back, I'd either be in the middle of the street, or I will have a lot of traffic in front, or it's just not possible in many cases. And to overcome those limitations, I use this a lot. I have also used it in wedding and events as well, when you have a big group of people and you just can't cover everyone, and it doesn't make sense to use a fisheye lens, or you don't have access to something like that, of a super wide lens or something. So that's when it comes really useful. Play with it. Just go out there and take a few photos and try and stitch it. You'll be amazed at how this little trick enhances what you can do as a photographer. I hope you liked this episode and found this useful. If you did so, please leave your feedback. I really want to know what you think about it, what I am doing wrong, what I can fix, what's good, what's not. I'm really looking forward to it. Have a wonderful time, everyone. Thank you.